Welcome to Innersight, Health Optimization with Rudy and Shaun. Hi, Rudy. Welcome back to podcast number 7.
Can't believe it. Number 7, eh?
Just time flies. Almost holiday time. But before that, let's just do a little recap on where we are in the program so far.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey for both of us. I think the learning wise, and it was a little bit boring in the first 6 episodes because we had to get through the real meat of how people really get sick, and it was almost like sitting in a medical school class, but. We've gone through why and how people die and what you should do not to die and how to get to be a kick-ass 80-year-old. So.
Yes, yeah, and we've mentioned the program that we do and what we test for, and now we're going to move to another part of the program because we test some other things as well, and we'll talk about those things today. How to age well, and specifically the mindset behind fitness and exercising for healthy aging.
Yeah. So as we talked about the marginal decade, we said don't die. So if we say you're gonna get to a good 80, so that means between 70 and 80 or 75 and 85, however you see yourself, you got to be able to live. So how do you live? You got to be able to do things. And I mean, you don't want to sit in a chair and just do nothing. So now we're going to describe what we tested in Innersight and there's the 4 legs that we actually put this all on that you can actually live. Yeah.
Yes, and that's part of the program is to ask you as a client or the patient, what do you want to do when you're 80? I think that's an important thing. That's an important question. And just maybe think about it for a while. I mean, I know what I want to be able to do at the age of 80, and I think the same for you. But there's certain things that we take for granted when we in our 30s, 40s, early 50s that might be a problem when we're older.
Yeah, little things like picking up your grandchild, carrying the sack of potatoes into the house, walking upstairs,
walking your dog around the block.
Absolutely. So, I mean, and in that, the 4 pillars that we talk about that you have to have to be strong enough, fit enough, flexible enough, and what's my last one? Stable enough.
Enough.
Yeah, while we talk about stable, I mean, even yesterday I was working in the emergency room and I saw an old chap fall. And if you fall, you break your hip, you've got up to 50% chance to die in that next year. So it's very, very important to have that stability. So, and people forget about stability. So, I mean, we're going to...
It all plays along and plays into each other. I mean, you need the stability. It's so important and often neglected, but you also need the muscle power and the fitness around that. So we need to look at all the aspects of fitness for healthy aging.
And that's actually the funny thing about this is we've talked about how not to die, but the best way to live, the golden ticket or the magic bullet here is actually exercise. That is the way you actually get to be a kick-ass 80-year-old. So.
Yeah, that's the biggest lever we can pull.
Yeah,
exercise.
Absolutely.
And the literature shows it.
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, the fittest people will live the longest. So you hear all kinds of different stories, but the stats are there. The fittest people will live the longest. So.
Yeah, I think to put it in perspective, if you look at, let's say, the VO2 max, and we look at the stats for that, and we look at stuff called hazard ratios and things like that, and you get a value, the risk of dying or the relative risk of dying. And something for cardiovascular disease is like, they call it 1.29, which is then 29% relative risk to die. And what you've said, if you compare those two with each other, then there's almost a 5-fold increased risk for dying for the unfit, but compared to the fit people, the elite athletes. And that's massive. That's massive.
Yeah, so I think for our people out there, if you have been a sportsman, then you've always trained for something. So you've always had a little program or someone coaching you. But the people that did not have that, they have to have a little bit of guidance about what to do, and that is why we test, so we can actually say, you know what, your aerobic exercise fitness is or your fitness in that sense, VO2 max that we test is low, or flexibility is low, stability is low. So yeah, it's
Well, I mean, even like a lifetime exerciser like myself, when I injured my back some months ago and I went to the biokineticist and they did a proper test on me, testing everything, muscle strength, balance, everything. We realized that I've got a big balance problem in the one side, and that might have caused some of the basically the muscle power on the one side was also off then. So it all plays in, and I didn't know about that. So we worked hard on that, and we fixed that. So even, you know, for someone that exercises its whole life, that I didn't pick it up.
Yeah, I think that was one of our biggest learnings, for ourselves as well, in the research for this program, how important balance is. So, but let's not put the cart in front of the horses. I'm gonna jump back, and for the listeners out there, we're gonna be touching on all four of these, but we're not going to be diving deep into all of it. So we're going to try and keep it as interesting as possible, because this is actually quite fun stuff. And then we will get to stability though a little bit later.
Yes, a little bit later.
But I wanted to talk about aerobic fitness. So, which again is one of those terms people are like, "What is aerobic fitness? If I'm a runner, am I aerobic fit? Or if I'm a rugby player, if I'm aerobic fit? Or if I'm a weightlifter, I'm aerobic fit?" So, and that is actually one of the tests we do, is a VO2 max test. So, and VO2 max test is pretty much a test that you can do in a lab, where they put a mask on you, oxygen in, CO2 out, and they put a certain load on your muscles, and then they check how you perform under that load, and get a value of how much oxygen you use against a certain load on your muscles. And then obviously your weight is also dependent in the calculation, and then you get a value of oxygen use per kilogram body weight.
Yeah, and that's actually your maximum value. At maximum exercise,
Yeah.
what's the amount of oxygen you can get out of the system?
Yeah, so it's quite a tough test, because they have to ramp it up, and they actually run you to where you're absolutely exhausted and can't do it anymore. And then you've got this mask on your face when you actually when you're really tired and you're sucking air and you're struggling against the mask. But a very, very good predictor for longevity. So and I mean, what that actually shows us is where you are now. So absolutely where you are now, and relative where you're going to be when you're an 80-year-old. So the relative fit person now, if you have a VO2 max of 35, absolutely you are fit-ish, but relatively you are quite unfit to a person with a VO2 max of 30 at 80 years old, because of that graph that we always talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So VO2 max do decrease over time. So we lose about 10% per decade. So if you start off with a VO2 max of 35 in your 30s, you're going to have a major problem when you reach your 80s. So it can't be 30, 35 in your 30s. And that's the thing. That's the one learning as well, is that we actually need to get these values up much higher than I thought before. We need to try and push up that value, so that when you get that decline, that you end up at a value that's acceptable to for your age at that point in time.
Yeah, I think people will now ask suddenly, okay, but how do I get my VO2 max up? So it depends on what you can do in a week. Can you do 5 hours, or can you do 10 hours? Because the guys that do 10 hours can fit in a lot of zone 2 training. But the guys that can't, that can only maybe do 5 hours a week, they have to split it 50-50 maybe with some high intensity interval training, whereas the longer guys must do the 80-20 split. The guys that train over 10 hours a week, they will kill themselves if they do a 50-50 split on a high intensity training level.
So the high intensity training is a shortcut, basically, for people to get to a higher VO2 max level in shorter time frame, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we talk about high intensity, we're talking about the zone 3 plus, and then the zone 4 and zone 5. So,
And this usually, just from a practical point of view, you do a short stint of high intensity, like maximal effort, and then you basically have a little rest time in between, and then you do another session of that. And there's different protocols of how you can do that.
yeah, so the classic one is like the Norwegian 4-minute 4x4. So we used to do them on the bike quite a bit. So you do 4 minutes at about 80 to 90. You try and do 100, but you can't. So you do about 80 to 90% of your heart rate max, and then so you will then rest for 4 minutes, do 4 minutes high intensity, and that's all you really need to do. So normally there was a 20-minute warm up and a 20-minute warm down, but that's not that necessary. You actually do need that high heart rate. So.
And then there's the shorter version as well, where you do a couple of like 30 seconds max out, like the Tabata style exercise.
Or 1 by 10 minutes. So yeah, but
and different ways to get to that point.
And as you said, that's like it gives you that boost in the VO2 max. The big problem, though, it doesn't make you fit for long distances, because you don't learn to feed off fat or fat metabolize.
Because you haven't built the base.
Yeah, so and that's why you see the triathletes and those guys that can do the 10 hours plus. They have these sessions where they just stay at a heart rate, and maybe we can just touch about the heart rate again. So where those zones are. So the split is pretty much at 180 minus your age. You want to stay under that for zone 2. And then the zones go up from there. But the easy number for people to have in their heads is 180 minus your age. But if you're more inclined into to doing calculators, then you do 220 minus your age times 0.6 is the lower limit of zone 2. 0.7. So 0.7 is the higher level. So that's where you start zone 3. 0.8, 0.9, and obviously then 1 is the top. So
and that's for the zone 2 training. That's for the base training.
Yeah, just in that number again, because people will ask this all the time. So it's 220 minus your age is pretty much where your max heart rate level will be, and that number you use, and you times that by 0.6. That is the lower limit of zone 2.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing about the zone 2 training is the idea is to stay in zone 2. You do specific zone 2 training. You don't want to go out of zone 2 too often, because then it's difficult to get back into the zone itself. Because once the lactic acid starts to build up, it's slightly difficult to get back into zone 2. So that's a dedicated zone 2 training that we're talking about, which is very good for the insulin resistance patients. And we do advise them often to do a lot of zone 2 training if they have the time of doing that.
Yeah. And I think this podcast will come out at a time when people will have these New Year resolutions. So, and people must just realize, if you haven't exercised for a long time, is to start very slow and low, and build yourself up, because you don't want to be going into a high intensity interval training without your body knowing that's coming. So
absolutely. And we're talking very general today.
Yeah.
When we see you as a patient in our clinic, then we have all the values in front of us, and then we can decide on how we're going to manage the way going forward. And we might ask you to maximum exercise at a heart rate of 110, 120, depending on your medical condition or your fitness level and things like that. So you need to be sensible about these things as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the other nice thing about what we're doing there is we get this complete picture. I mean, we know how your body's functioning on the inside, pretty much, with your cholesterol level, with your iron level, where your vitamins are, how your kidneys are, how your liver is. I mean, we've got a fair idea before we actually start telling you where we think you should be going. So, and from the guy that wants to ride the Epic or run the Comrades, that's a whole different type of training than someone that is an office worker that just wants to be a very, very good 80-year-old. So, yeah.
Yeah, so often for the non-athlete, if we put it that way, we'll have shorter exercise periods, and we'll lean a little bit more to the high-intensity interval training than the base building. We're always going to try and get that base building in some way, but if you only have 2 hours a week to exercise, that's a bit problematic. So then the split will be a little bit different.
Yeah, and hence I say that where we say people mustn't just go and just do high intensity interval training, because the ticker takes strain, and if your ticker is not used to that strain, or there's something wrong with the heart, hence, I mean, if you don't see us, go and see your GP or your cardiologist or someone that tells you that you can actually do that, because I mean, we want to strain your heart, because with this good training, you can actually, I mean, it's been proven that you can actually make your heart 20 years younger if you start training and you haven't been training. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how good exercise actually is for you.
And it plays into everything: cardiovascular disease, brain health, everything.
Yeah, I mean, even cancer. I mean, I heard somewhere this week on listening to a podcast about cancer, and even that where you do that high intensity training, the cancer cells are
sheer force.
Yeah, the sheer force of them turning around in the body at that fast pace. It bursts them, and you can actually make sure you don't get any metastases after, which is amazing.
Crazy to think of it.
Yeah. I mean,
so we're talking about cardiorespiratory fitness at the moment, the one leg, and the measure we use is VO2 max.
Yeah.
And we're talking about values, and we set like 35 too low for a 30-year-old. But there's actually, for your age, you can go look it up. There's we've got the values, and we look at it. But in general, when you want to do basic things, living activities, walk up the stairs, work in the garden, things like that, we need a VO2 max ideally of around about between 25 and 30. 30 is a nice VO2 max for an 80-year-old, because then you'll be able to walk the dog, you'll go for a hike and things like that. Around about between 15 and 20, there's the cutoff when you end up in an institution and someone who needs to look after you. So, and you can work out the equation yourself. If you're going to lose like 10% of your VO2 max every decade, then you can see if you're going to end up at a 20, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And that's also the reason why we do the test like at least every year, so we can follow it over time and make sure that you're on target and you're not losing too much VO2 max over time, so that we can adjust your program and see if we can just maintain that slightly better. So if you do exercise, if you already at your, let's say your max VO2 max, and you keep on exercising, you can reduce that 10% decline to about 5% or so, which helps a lot. And you start off at a higher level initially. So
yeah, I just wanted to say it's not all doom and gloom now. So, but it's good to know the value now, because it's so much harder later in your life to push it up. But if you're still a pretty good 40 or 50-year-old, you can actually improve your VO2 max, let's say from a 40 to a 45, and that makes a big difference in that decline. So you can actually make yourself better. So, but it's good to have that value because you're actually planning for something. So that is and I think people need to get in their minds, what do they look like when they're 80-year-old? I mean, are they strong enough to carry a sack of potatoes? And as we said when we started, they need to have that in their mind and then say, okay, but I still want to swim from Robben Island to Blouberg, or I want to swim the channel or ride the Sani to sea as an 80-year-old. I mean, it's not impossible. You just need to plan for it then.
Yeah, it's not going to happen on its own. No, I think that's absolutely the point.
Yeah.
And exercise is for free.
And we're gonna
unless we're gonna cycle.
Yeah. we're going to circle and circle around this all the time, but there's actually, except for stopping smoking, actually nothing better that you can do for your health than to do exercise. And yeah,
And yes, I know there's a lot of people that don't like to exercise, but any form of exercise, any little bit of exercise is better than none.
yeah, and you're touching on a good point there, because the problem is, people want to be pushed into going to the gym or whatever. But think about yourself as a 12, 13, 14-year-old. What did you like to do then? Like, go back to it. If you liked walking the dog, then walk the dog again and do it at a faster pace. So that's at least is cardiorespiratory fitness. So, and then we got to say, okay, but put a weight on your arms and each arm as you walk, because I mean, that's the next part that we're going to talk about. You need a bit of strength as well. And I mean, so just think about things that you actually enjoy doing, because as a child, you did enjoy a few things. And
Yeah, the problem is we stop playing.
yeah,
We need to play more.
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, so let's say you've worked on your fitness, so your cardiorespiratory stuff is okay. So how do we think about strength?
So strength is also very important. I mean, we talked about VO2 max. Now we're talking about strength. So you need the muscle power, because when you're older, as you said, you want to lift your suitcase above your head into the overhead compartment. You want to carry your shopping bags up the staircase. You want to brace yourself if you have a fall and not break something. So strength is enormously important. And as we said with the VO2 max, that we lose about 10% over a decade. With strength, we lose about 3 to 8% per decade muscle mass, starting at age 30, more or less. And then round about age 60, that number increases. So if we do nothing, we're just going to lose muscle mass. So we need to do certain exercises. Now, there's different types of muscle fibers, and I'm going to be very superficial here. So if you get the slow twitch or type 1 fibers and the fast twitch type 2 fibers, there's a little bit more depth there, but just to keep it easy, we lose a lot of the type 2 fibers when we age. Okay, and that's the fast twitch fibers, and we see it. You know, you go to the mid-30s when your children are at school, and suddenly the dads need to do a 100-meter sprint, and how often someone just hurts themselves or pull a muscle not well afterwards. It's because we lose that ability. We lose those fast twitch muscles, and we keep the endurance muscles, the slow twitch, for longer, and we're good at, in keeping them up. If we exercise and do endurance exercising, and you'll see a lot of endurance athletes can still do the races at an older age, but the sprinters, they've got a lifetime. They can't do that at age 40, 45. It's impossible because of the loss of those muscle fibers.
Yeah, the marathon runners actually get better as they get older.
Yeah. So, and it's a resistance. We need that resistance to try and keep that fibers. So you need to, the same as with the VO2 max. We need to start with more muscle, and we need to build harder to keep the muscle.
Yeah. So as we said in our previous podcast, the big focus is keep your brain and keep your muscle. So these are the two things. So we talked about dementia in podcast number 6, and this is now the sarcopenia. Keep your muscle, because that's the thing that's going to make you be able to be strong.
So the strength is more important than the muscle size. Okay, but muscle size sometimes do correlate a little bit with strength. So we use muscle size as well to look at muscle strength. So basic things we do in the program, we test muscle strength. So a simple thing like a grip strength. Now, if you think of it, for every 5 kilos that you drop in your grip strength, you've got a 15 to 20% increase in all-cause mortality. That's the one test we do. And we can then compare year after year and see if there's a decrease in your grip strength. We need to work on the muscle, upper body muscles, and see if we can get your grip stronger. Simple things like carrying bags or hanging from a pull-up bar, things like that, just increasing the muscle in your forearms.
And I think that's good about our program is that we're doing things that that you normally would not do. So, or the doctor would normally not do. So it's like, I mean, because we're into fixing that much, we're actually not looking forward. But in this program, we're now saying, okay, but if this is your grip strength now, that's what it's going to look like at 80 if you do exactly the same thing or if you don't change your lifestyle.
Exactly. And so we do the grip strength, we do push-up tests, and we do sit and stand tests and squat tests and things like that to test the muscle power. It's a screening. So if you really want to test it, we send you to the biokineticist, and we'll speak to the biokineticist on I think the next podcast, if I'm correct, about balance and muscle power and things like that, and we'll talk a little about how they test it and I mean, it's nice to know because then they can test exactly each muscle on its own. But for us, we need to get like a baseline and see if we need to do more in-depth testing for muscle power. A simple sit-stand test. What we do is, I mean, that one was it in 2002 or something? Can't remember the date exactly. The study they did in Brazil, where they've taken 50 to 80-year-old people, and they've just done a normal test asking them to sit on the ground and stand up, not using your hands or knees or whatever. And they've seen that the people that couldn't do it had a 7-fold increase in death over the next 10 years. So, I mean, you need your muscle power.
Yeah. Absolutely. In the sense, I mean, we talk about quite a few things. We haven't really touched on any supplements, except for last time we talked about the vitamin B12 and omega-3s. But in the strength, that's actually one of the supplements that we talk about quite a lot with our clients and patients is creatine. So that's probably comes in the strength.
Protein.
Yeah. So those two that's the strength part. You want the muscles to be able to be built. And then also strength is normally a short duration, where actually creatine is that first 10 seconds of exercise is or of high intensity exercise is normally creatine based. So
the other thing is when we lose muscle with age, we gain fat. And now suddenly there's a change in your body composition. And we see it often, and especially in females at the menopause age as well. So you lose muscle, you gain fat. You don't gain weight on the scale, but your composition changes. And muscle is just more metabolic active. And then your incidence of insulin resistance goes up, and just having more muscle on board is just more healthy.
yeah. And I mean, again, it plays into everything, as you said now, with the insulin resistance. I mean, if you exercise, that makes the glucose transport better. It actually, people always thought the lactic acid was bad, but it's actually very good, and it's a transmitter inside to tell the body that it's actually a little bit under stress, and the body can actually use lactic acid as a fuel. But it also stresses the body, and I mean, it's good for the brain. So in that sense, I mean, just rounding the whole thing again is exercise. If we can get most people moving, that would be amazing.
So for healthy aging, doesn't help us we've only got the cardiovascular fitness, because if you have a fall, then you've got a problem. So you need both. So you need the muscle strength as well, combined with the cardiovascular fitness, to be a healthy 80-year-old.
Yeah. And again, we will dive deep into the strength and what to do. So we for this episode, we really just wanted to touch on the 4 pillars. So let's leave strength there. I mean, like we said, we do the VO2 max for the aerobic capacity. We do the strength tests, so that you just said, and then obviously there's flexibility. So, I mean, the flexibility is the next part. I mean, the easy easy way to see that someone is not flexible is if you see an old guy walking in the street, and I always say they walk behind their knees. They literally can't move their hips, and their knees can't extend. Then so they've pulled themselves up into a position, and they haven't moved. In one of the Atia podcasts lately, there was this book called Built to Move.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the major components of flexibility is actually hip flexibility. So, and you have to be flexible. I mean, again, just pointing to what you want to be able to do at 80. You want to be able to pick up your grandchild. So you have to be able to bend. You have to be picking up something off the floor.
You want to be able to sit on the ground with your grandchildren.
Exactly. So, and if I had to pick one exercise for flexibility, I would say sit on the floor as much as you can. So with your legs forward, with your legs pulled up and bent, we just don't sit like that anymore. And some person said to me, the worst thing that's ever been developed for flexibility is the toilet, because we're actually used to squat into a squat position to go to the toilet. And these days we sit on a toilet, so we're not getting that open hips. And that's why children are so flexible. They actually are on the ground all the time. They can get up and down, and they use that hips.
But society is forcing us into chairs as well. So, and you see it in schools these days as well. You need to sit in your chair type of thing. So we lose a lot of flexibility. If you don't use it, you lose it type of scenario. It also plays into balance as well. You need a bit of flexibility there. You need to be flexible to exercise without pain. It just makes you feel better in general.
Yeah, and I want to go back to flexibility to say, people will say, but what do I have to do? Do I have to stretch? And most people do not stretch. So
very few people.
Yeah. So if you want, you can do Pilates or yoga. Absolutely brilliant. You can go to classes and people will stretch you, so they help you stretch. So absolutely. But if you don't go to these classes, you at least, the one thing you have to do is to go sit on the floor, because to get on the floor you have to be a little bit flexible. And if you sit with your hips open and let them fall, then that makes your hips flexible. So, and the moment you get up, you will stretch. So if you do nothing at all, just sit on the floor as much as you can with legs open.
Yeah, and things like lower back pain and other issues are so common these days, and it helps a lot if you can sit on the ground in a flex position with things like that, and prevent lower back issues as well.
Yeah. So maybe before we go off the topic and maybe move on to stability, the other thing that you can maybe do is if you want to do a stretch at home, is to just put your leg on the couch. So you put your back leg on the back rest, and then your knee on where the seat is, and you just other foot just forward, and just that little bit of flexibility, so that you're actually stretching what we call the hip flexors. That opens you up, that you don't become one of those old people that walk behind their knees because the hips can actually straighten out.
Yeah, and a proper deep squat sit is also a nice move for flexibility in the hips as well.
Yeah, and that brings it all back together. Is actually that person in the Brazilian study where you actually sit on the ground and have to get up. That brings that whole circle together. And again, it is actually so simple, but people don't do it. All right, and then let's talk about not trying not to fall on your hip, because at the end of the day, that's
what balance is about.
That's what we're talking about. Is you don't want to fall, and I think. So since we started Innersight, that's probably been the one of the biggest surprises. What we find is that people do not realize how bad their balance is.
Oh, the balance is off. I don't know. My balance was that bad.
Yeah.
Yes. So balance. We don't want to fall. I think that's the main thing, because after 65, we know if you fall, it's a problem.
So I'm going to take you back quickly. So let's just say what we test. So we test eyes open balance, both
Yes,
legs.
yeah. So we do a eyes open test and we do eyes closed test on each leg, and then there's yet again we go look at the values that's normal for your age and gender and things like that to see. It's obviously easier to balance on one leg with your eyes open than with your eyes closed because
Yeah.
to have balance you use your eyes for visual spatial position. You use your middle ear system basically for balance, and you use the proprioception from your feet and
Yeah.
the floor and stuff to get your balance. So if you close your eyes, you take one of those out of the equation, and then usually most people, almost all people, it will be less. But it mustn't be too much. Okay? So there's still a normal value there that you want to get. But it just shows you that it's not the visual spatial problem then, that it's more likely to proprioception or middle ear problem there that where the problem might lie. So we test it, and then we'll talk in depth with the biokineticist and what can we do about balance and things like that. And there's other tests that you can do for balance as well, but that's the one that we've decided on doing. It's an easy test. It's something you can do at home as well.
Yeah, and we'll touch on most of these things again when we delve deeper. VO2 max, what tests? But yeah, for now, if people want to think about their stability, how do you break it down? Where do they start? What can they do?
So you've got two forms of balance as such, of stability. So you've got your base stability, as keeping your position over your base, and then you've got dynamic stability or dynamic balance, where you move out of your base, across midline and things like that. And you need both of them. To have balance, you need to have all the senses. You need to have your visual, spatial, the middle ear should be fine. You need your proprioception to have good balance, but you also need your core muscles. So you need to engage your core muscles as well to keep your body in position, in a balanced position. And it's shown that we talk about falling, but for the younger people, like for athletes, just practicing their balance, they've got a better sense of their center of gravity and they can generate more power by doing that. For the older people, we want that to prevent falls, and there's studies showing that you probably reduce falls by 40% if you practice your balance. So it's an important part of the aging well fitness regime is to do balance exercises. There's different balance exercises you can do, but I think a basic thing, so when you do your muscle strengthening training, you do maybe body weight exercises, things like that, is to definitely have single-legged exercises in the regime and definitely have some exercises where you cross the midline.
Yeah, and like you say, we're going to try and get our biokineticist on the next podcast. So, and we don't want to delve too deep, but for the person that listens to this in the last week of December, going into January, what we're trying to say to people is most people have got a deficiency in one of these. I mean, like we said, we were strong as 20-year-olds. Now we may be a little bit fitter, but people don't realize how bad their balance is. So if you had to give them one thing to do.
Well, so just a simple thing is like, it's a study showing that if you can stand on one leg for more than 10 seconds, okay, the chance of, you've got a 90% chance of being alive in the next 10 years. If you cannot stand on one leg for 10 seconds, that drops down to 65%. So just go test yourself at home.
That's amazing. And again, I must say that again, I don't think people realize how bad their balance is. And yeah, our Innersight program has shown that balance is actually almost like blood pressure. This high hidden silent that catches up to people because it's better to have it now and have it absolutely nailed down than to try and learn it when you're 75.
The other thing is that I actually didn't realize with my balance. Like we've got a space where we get dressing area at our house, and I used to stand and lean against the wall when I put on my shoes and my socks. I didn't make much of it at that time. And now I know it's because my balance was off. Because I can stand on one leg now and put on my sock and my shoe after I've worked with the biokineticist. So that's another test you can do maybe at home. Can you put on your socks while standing on one leg? Put on your sock, put on your shoe, and then the other side. If you can't do that, you might have a balance issue, and then you might need to get someone to work with you. Yet again, we've got the balance test in our program. It's a screening test. If we do pick up problems, we work with the biokineticist and say, listen, we've screened this guy, balance is off. Can you do a proper evaluation and then see if we can work on improving that? What we do find is it's usually a combination of things. It's usually a muscle strength problem with a balance problem altogether. It's seldom that it's a simple single element.
Yeah,
all plays in together.
That's why we want people tested probably around their 40s, like early 40s, late 30s, so we can have that value and then work it through. Because, I mean, yes, it's good to have your first screening at any time after that, but the later you wait for these things, the more difficult it is to fix.
No, absolutely. And I mean, if you test someone, you get a value, and that's a single view value in a time frame. So I don't know. What was it like 2 years back? Was it better or was it worse? Are you actually doing better now or doing worse now? So that's why it's nice if we can do the program yearly and get the values and build up some data and then can follow you over time and say, listen, these ones are slightly going off rail, so we need to work on these. The other parameters looks good. Just keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Great.
It's seldom that you react to any one value. It's always trends in everything in medicine almost.
Yeah, and that's why data is so important, because the moment we can plug in your data that we've got after a year, 2 or 3 into one of the verified programs, that we can actually see where you're going, and we can actually tell you, hey, you know what, you're gonna be very close to being a great 80-year-old. So at the moment, we're using your absolute values to try and plug it in, but once we've got a trend, we know where you're headed.
Yeah. And I think my thinking has changed over time. Is that I realize now is that we need to exercise much more than we think. We're not as fit as we think we are. And we neglect a lot of stuff like the balance. You need to have the whole picture. And it's a process.
Absolutely. Yeah, but it's nice. It's nice that you can move yourself into an area where you know you're actually doing well. Because otherwise, you're just living and you're like, I don't know where I am.
And I think the nice thing with exercising is you see results. It's like a silly thing, like I can stand on one foot now and put on my shoe. It's like, wow. But I mean, you've got things that you can compare with. VO2 max, you've got a number. Push-ups, how many push-ups can you do? Oh, last year I did only 30. Now I can do 45. It's a nice thing. It's a measurable outcome type of thing, and that's nice.
And it helps you to be to a good 80. That's the other nice thing.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, but we've touched on most of exercise now, so now we have to go and do it. We're heading into the holidays, or most of you guys will be on holiday by the time you listen to this. So yeah, I hope you found the touching points on this. So go and find us on www.innersight.co.za, or on we'll be on Spotify, we'll be on Apple, we'll be on YouTube, and we'll be throwing some of our shorts now onto Facebook and also onto Insta. So yeah,
wonderful.
And leave some comments if you, even if we've changed the lightning because of the comments, and
Awesome, Rudy. Yeah, so next one we'll probably talk about balance, and then we'll go a little bit deeper into balance, and then we might have our first guest speaker.
Great.
Yeah,
Have a good one.
exciting.